Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Prime Time at the BU Library. These Prime Times are a celebration of the experiences and accomplishments of Bethel faculty, students, and staff, and are a collaborative project between the Friends of the BU Library, Faculty Development, and other offices on campus. If you enjoy Primetime programming, please consider becoming a member of the Friends. Ask at the Research Assistant's desk for more information. And archived recordings of most of our Primetime presentations are in the BU Digital Library on the library's website. Today is the last of our presentations for this semester, and we're very pleased to feature Sam Mulberry, the winner of the Faculty Excellence Award for Service. He's an Associate Professor of History and Co-Director of the Academic Enrichment and Support Center. The Faculty Excellence Awards are given annually to faculty who exhibit excellence as teachers, scholars, and individuals, and this makes them role models in the Bethel community. They are nominated and chosen by their peers each year. Sam exemplifies what it means to be a generous servant leader in various arenas, from co-leading the Ask Center, his contributions on institutional committees and task force work, to supporting pedagogical creativity with digital media. Sam works many hours beyond his expected duties, taking on additional new projects to support pedagogical growth. He has a strong commitment to serving others so that they can provide innovative strategies in teaching students. Today, Sam is the focus of a live podcast for a series that he's developed called Autobiography. His friend, colleague, and podcast partner, Chris Moore, Professor of Political Science, will be hosting this morning as we learn more about Sam, his roots, and what makes him tick. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much, and welcome to Autobiography. I'm not Sam Mulberry. His voice is the one you usually hear at the beginning of every episode, but I'm Chris Moore, and I have the privilege today of interviewing Sam Mulberry for his autobiography. So,
I just want to point out that I'm very nervous about your cup of coffee and like how tall and narrow this table is. That's going to spill by the end of the show. It's like Chekhov's gun. Like we're pointing it out now.
It's going to go
by
off
the end of the show, that's
by
going to be on the floor.
I'm pretty sure that happens. Sam, thanks for being here. This is also, we should mention, a part of being live from the Bethel Library presentation as well. So, are you going to be doing some crowd work later today?
We'll see, yeah.
Okay.
A lot of podcasting this week. We did a workshop last night.
It's true.
Yeah, so.
Tis the season.
That's right.
Well, Sam, I have some questions I want to ask you, and a little bit about your intellectual autobiography. And you are anticipating the very first question I want to ask you because you have brought some visual aids here. So I'm going to ask you to start off with 3 books that if someone who didn't know you could read to understand a little bit of who you are.
And this is the only prepared question because this is a question this was a question I love to ask people in college. I grew up not really a reader. I don't think I really read that much until college. And then I spent all of college and ever since trying to catch up with people. So I always love to talk to people about books that they thought defined them or described them, because it would also give me things to read. So I brought 3 books because I prepared for this. And this question is I'm going to preface my answer by saying this question always runs the risk of sounding pretentious, no matter what you say, like pick a work of literature and say this speaks to me or this resonates with me. So I'm going to put that caveat out there and then I'll just talk. So the first book that I would recommend to someone if they wanted to know about me is, and I actually don't have a copy just of the book, it's A Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man by James Joyce. Joyce is one of my all-time favorite writers. So this is probably the most pretentious book to point out, but it's a pretty hard book to read. I'm a fan of Joyce generally. I've made it through about a third of Finnegan's Wake, which means you're a Joycean at that point. I don't think you need to finish it. But I loved Ulysses. I didn't read it. I started reading. I don't know why I'm not talking about Portrait. I started reading Ulysses about 3 times when I was in my early 20s.
Okay.
And then when I was 38, I actually sat and read it and loved it. So, which I find interesting because Joyce, there's 2 main characters in Ulysses. Stephen Dedalus, who's the main character of Portrait, is about 22. And then Leopold Bloom is about 38 or 39, and I didn't get the book until I was 38 or 39. So, but Portrait is.
Do you think you need to be 38 or 39 to get the book?
You know, I talked with Dan Taylor about that because that was my theory. But I was told that if you're an English major, you read it at 22 and you just read it. But for me, I needed to be 39 because I'm not an English major. But there's something about. And maybe we'll get into this about the things that I wanted to do when I was a little kid. I'm not a mechanical person at all, but I really like to make things. So that meant if you can't build things, then what you end up making is some kind of art. I'm also not a very good writer, so that's another thing that is a problem. So I spent a lot of time as a kid doing visual arts, and I really, 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 as a kid, wanted to make movies and cartoons. And so I've always just been interested in making things, and something about the character of Stephen Dedalus in A Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man, it sounds weird to say like that. It just sort of resonated in my soul when I was probably 21 when I read it, and I read it twice that year because I took as a senior in college I took Dan Taylor's 20th Century Literature course, and again I wasn't a lit major. I didn't have any of the prereqs, but I went and talked with Dan and I said I've never met him before, and I said I want to read the books you're reading in this class. And I promise I'll try to read as much of it over the summer before class. So that was one of the books I read over the summer, and then I read again. And it's been one of my favorite books. And I think, I don't know. I think I understand Joyce. The reason I love Joyce is because I think I kind of understand him as a person. He's one of the few writers that I read a big biography on. After I finished Ulysses, I read the big Richard Elliman biography because I just wanted to know more and more about him.
Does the book, does A Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man evoke more ideas or emotions in you?
It's more visceral than intellectual, I think. Although it's a kind of an intellectual book, but I think I would have been a friend of Stephen's, and I don't think Stephen had a lot of friends. And actually, so this is also I needed to mention this book for my grandmother, who passed away about 5 or 6 years ago, because I have the only grandmother who's like a hardcore James Joyce fan as well. She was a librarian, so she read everything. And I remember when the Modern Library, at the end of the 20th century, the Modern Library put out a list of the 100 greatest English language novels of the 20th century. And I remember talking with her and asking her how many of those books she read, and she looked over the list, and it was about 80 or 85 of them. So I was like, so anyhow, all that is to say, I'm part of my people come from Ireland, and our family name is Byrne, B-Y-R-N-E, and Cranley in Portrait and in Ulysses is a guy named John Byrne. So in family lore, we like to pretend at least that we're related to John Byrne, who was one of James Joyce's really good friends when he was a young man. So we like to pretend that we're like almost related to Joyce.
You made that claim.
Yeah. So it's familial in that way too. So my grandmother loved to tell me the story of like, John Byrne was his friend, and we're Burns. So although like half the people in Ireland are named Burns, so you have to kind of ignore that fact, and then you get to feel like you're close.
Good. That's good. What else do you have here for us?
Second book is actually a book I read more recently from one of my kind of new favorite authors, and that is The Pale King by David Foster Wallace. So Chris likes to make fun of the fact that I only read audiobooks. Well, that's not what you like to make fun of.
It's both that you read them that way and how you read them that way.
Yeah, so I read audiobooks at triple speed, but I also
which is also known as chipmunking.
Yes, but I also read them 4 or 5 times. So in the last probably 3 years, I've read this 4 or 5 times, and I was introduced to Wallace reading Infinite Jest, and I really like that, and I'm about 5 times through that too. But actually, this book I love even more because this is a book about boredom and tedium, and it's the best novel about boredom and tedium. It's about IRS accountants in the mid-1980s. I don't know if anybody's ever read this, but this was there's a I kind of don't want to ruin this speech because no one's going to read this, but there's a speech probably about halfway through where one of the one of the characters accidentally walks into an advanced accounting class at I think it's Loyola of Chicago. It's a Jesuit school because there's a Jesuit supposedly teaching this course, and he gives this speech to the students who are about to go take their CPAs and about to become accountants, and he talks about how what they're about to go do is the most heroic thing you can do in the 20th century. And he says, like, basically he says the dragons have all been slayed at this point. The frontier has been conquered. That the new sort of villain to the modern day hero is boredom and tedium and ennui. And it's just this like great speech about like that's actually the thing we need to conquer to make life meaningful is to sort of see past those things and see through those things. So it's something that I come back to a lot.
Do you think that's true?
It feels like it sometimes. Yeah, I think there's something to that. Yeah, so that really resonated with me. I feel like if you've heard Wallace's "This Is Water" speech, I feel like this was the book he was writing when he gave that speech, and this is a more blown out version of some of the ideas he talks about there. So this is a book that I will keep reading. All these books are books that my kids are 10 and 12 right now, that I'm just excited for them to get to an age. I'm not really allowed to give them the books that I want them to read yet because they're not quite ready for them. But yeah, this is a book like I think partially like these are things I want my kids to read to be like you can make sense out of your dad by talking about these. And the last one is probably it's the smallest and most important book to me, and it's actually only half of this book. I'm a big J.D. Salinger fan, and so he published a lot of short stories in kind of novella form. So the second half of Raised High the Roof Beam Carpenters and Seymour, the short story Seymour is probably oddly the most me thing I've ever read. I was one of those kids I read Catcher in the Rye at the exact right age, probably 15, and I think I learned the right lessons from it.
Okay.
Which I don't think a lot of people do. I think as they get older.
What's the right lesson?
I think the most important part of the book is when he talks, for me, and it's not the most important, the most important part for me is when he's talking about actually what becomes the title of the book, the idea of what he wants to be is a catcher in the rye, somebody who's sort of making sure these kids in this field that are playing, I don't know why they're playing a game right by this big cliff, but what Holden says he wants to do is he wants to stand at the edge of that cliff and make sure nobody, when they're playing, accidentally falls over. To me, that's the part that always resonates with me. Now, one thing I'll say about all of these books is Portrait is the least plotless of these books. Most of these stories don't really have plots, and I realized a couple weeks ago, my wife and I read very different books, but I was like, okay, I'm going to read some things that she likes. So I read a Jane Austen book, and I read a Agatha Christie book, two of her favorite authors, and when I finished them, I said, oh, I get it, I just don't like plot. I don't really care if stuff is happening, and the books I like, if somebody asks you, what was that about? I want to talk about moments. So like for me, Catcher's about that moment, even though that's not even part of the narrative of the book almost. But this book is about, this is probably the closest thing to sort of about creating art. It starts off with the author who's going to tell you a little bit about his brother who passed away, who committed suicide. And it starts by him saying, I am not going to make apologies for being tangential, for being parenthetical, for going wherever the road takes me. I feel like this is the time Salinger's like, I'm just going to write the way I want to write. And and there's a points in my life where I have gone back to this book. This actually, this book resides in my winter coat pocket because this is a book I want to have with me. So when I graduated from Bethel, my first year out of college, I taught art at a high school in Mobile, Alabama. I lived with monks. It sounds way better than it actually is. So I lived with monks and taught art at a high school in Alabama, which was it's a pretty lonely experience. Because you go to a place like you've never been before, and I'm not good at meeting people. And I knew I was going to be there for a year, so I didn't think, well, I'm not going to put roots down in Alabama. I'm coming home. So I really didn't get to know people, and I literally lived with monks, and I had my own little room, and I read a lot while I was down there. And when you're 22 and you're teaching 14-year-olds, you don't really relate very well to them. Plus, you're teaching an art course none of them want to take. And it was really disheartening. But there's a passage, and maybe we can come back to this at the end. This is actually a good way to close, maybe. There's a passage that I would find myself reading when I would feel disheartened about being a teacher. Now I can say at Bethel I've had to go back to that passage a lot less frequently. I had to read it a lot when I was down there, convincing myself that that what we were doing was important. So yeah.
Okay. I want to hear that at the end.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. So 3 books explain you entail relation, connection, boredom and tedium, and standing at the edge of a cliff. I think we need to work through this a little bit. I think. When I think about Sam Mulberry, I think about somebody who wears a lot of hats. And at the risk of you pulling out your calendar here, what does a typical day at Bethel look like for Sam Mulberry?
If it's a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, it's a teaching day, which
Okay.
means I don't do Ask Counseling, which means I do just a little bit of Ask Counseling. I mean, those are really my CWC days. So I teach and coordinate that. It's just boring. I go to a lot of meetings for stuff. So being in Ask, both Ruth Nelson and I have a lot of. We're on committees officially, and then you get asked because academic support ties into stuff. But yeah, so it's a lot. I wake up really early in the morning, so I get up around 4, because that's a family disease too. I think is early rising. Not the family I married into, but that's my disease.
Okay.
So my wife and I will frequently be about 5 or 6 hours off in our. That's not fair. Probably 4 or 5 hours off. If we were on our natural schedules. So I go to sleep really early, but I wake up early, I clean the house, I make lunch for the kids, and then I wake the kids up before I leave. My son is also an early riser, so he was inflicted with that, but I wake my daughter up before I go.
Okay.
And then I get in around 6, and I get my work done before the day starts, because once there's meetings in class, then stuff gets away from me.
What time during the day would you most like to be reading one of these books?
Right away in the morning, my mind is definitely sharpest. I probably need to read stuff later, but I find that when there's things I often don't do, like I don't listen to music very often. Except when I do, I realize how much it affects me and changes me, and I realize I should probably do that more. And I think the same way probably about reading in the morning more. The morning is usually about getting stuff done, so I don't.
Sure.
But that's why I listen to audiobooks. So I'll listen, as I'm doing stuff around the house in the morning.
You said music affects you, and reading affects you too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. How so? Give me an example.
I was thinking a lot about the idea, because the idea of being affected by things. I think that's the thing I hope most is. I think I have a tendency. I mean, there's a reason that I went and lived with monks. I think there's an alternate version of my life where I'm a monk. Like that's not that it's not like I thought about that, but like I'm wired for that. Like I'm wired to be alone. It's a miracle that I got married and have kids. I'm wired to be, kind of monastic, and part of that then is it's easy to one version of a monk is to sort of be not so attached to the things of this world. And sometimes the downside of that, I think, my fear is that then I don't get affected by the things of this world. So like I seek out wanting to be affected by things. So like I want to, when I'm experiencing art, when I'm reading, when I'm listening to music, like one of my goals is like I want to have some kind of response to it and not just be not affected. Because I think I'm at my worst when I go through stretches where I'm not affected and I'm not making things.
The idea of being affected resonates with my impression of you and what you seek. And I want to ask you about a specific educational experience you had, which you've described to me as being very affecting. But to get there, I want to ask you this. How did you come to Bethel?
That's actually a weird accident of fate or mercy or providence or something. But I grew up Catholic. I went to Catholic schools my whole life. And I I'm from a relatively small town, about 16,000 people in southern Minnesota, so not like Pioneer, Ohio, small, but small. And in my hometown, there was the Catholic schools and a lot of sort of Irish, French immigrants from in my hometown. And so there was the Catholic schools, but then there were also a Lutheran school. And then there was the public high school. And the Lutheran schools went up to 8th grade. So when I was in 9th grade, all of a sudden, the students who were in the Lutheran school, their parents needed to make a choice. Do we send our kids to public school or do we send them to the Catholic school? And I don't know how you make that choice, but they had to make that choice. So all of a sudden in 9th grade, I learned what a Protestant was because there were all these people who were religious but weren't Catholic. And I never really encountered that before. And I had a friend who, it wasn't a friend at the time, so the person in the locker next to me was one of these kids. And I remember asking him once I knew he wasn't Catholic, so I asked him what he was, and he said he was a Baptist, and I thought he was lying. Because again, I don't have a perspective on this. I knew that there was something called a Lutheran, but I wasn't quite sure what that was. But I thought Baptists were like the preachers on TV, and they were in the South. So when he said he was a Baptist, I thought, well, that's and it turns out there were Baptists in Minnesota. So he and I became friends because I think we were just sort of interested in the fact that we had these different backgrounds, but we both were probably reaching an age where we were starting to take faith seriously. Kind of around 9th grade, I think for me was definitely a moment where, I kind of wanted to think what I thought about it. And I will say my parents, they sent my brother and I to Catholic schools. They drove us to church, but they're not particularly religious people, so they sort of thought that was important for us. So that was kind of a moment when I was also pushed out of the nest a little bit to sort of be like, if you want to go. I remember having the sense of waking up on a Sunday and deciding, do I want to go to church or not? Which, as a 9th grader, you're maybe just starting to be ready to think about that. So anyhow, we were interested in each other in that way, so we started to go to each other's churches. Now, he went to Mass because it was a Catholic school, so we would do that in school. And I would go to his church, and I remember being, as a kind of extreme introvert, being terrified the first time I went to a Protestant service where people were a little more charismatic than not charismatic at all, which my church was. Right. And so that was, we sort of started to share each other's religious experiences, and he's somebody who knew his whole life he was going to come to Bethel.
Oh, okay.
So I, just to be nice, applied. That's why I applied to Bethel, was because
courtesy application.
It absolutely was. Sure. So my dream, because this was the early 90s, my dream was to go to Notre Dame. That's where I really wanted to go to school. Yeah. So I applied to Notre Dame, I applied to Bethel, I applied to St. John's, and I applied to the University of Minnesota. My brother went to the U of M. That was too big. Because I graduated with 39 people, so the thought of going from there to the U, that was off the table. I was probably wise enough to know that if I went to St. John's, it would be continuing high school. Because all of my friends went there, all of the people that I'd been through school with. It was a tight-knit group. We had a kid who joined our class, moved to my hometown in 2nd grade, and when we graduated, I still thought of him as a new kid. That's how tight that core was. So I just realized, if I go somewhere other than where all these kids from high school are going, I get to actively kind of redefine myself, and I hadn't really had an opportunity to do that leading up. So that I took St. John's off the table, so I came down to Notre Dame and Bethel, and I got into both schools. And I remember distinctly, this is not the way you should choose a school, but I remember it was a Saturday afternoon in probably March, and I sat down with the only information I had about the two schools that I applied to, which for some reason was the course catalogs. So I read the Notre Dame course catalog.
On purpose?
Yes.
Okay.
And then I read the Bethel course catalog.
Okay.
And when I finished the Bethel one, I said, this is where I'm going to go to school. This is not promotional material. I don't know, but that's all I had. That's how dumb you are at that age, and it's before the internet, so you don't have, you can't really look stuff up. So that was what I had. And I figured they sent it to me, so this is supposed to tell me about the school. So for some reason, that's where I decided. I think, if I'm being honest, I think I was scared. I think I was scared to go out of Minnesota. I was scared to go to a big school where I wasn't sure. you don't know when you're in a small pond, like what you're capable of academically. So I think Bethel at least was smaller. It seemed like they were nice people. So that's why I came. And I will say, in terms of Catholicism, like I grew up in the perfect window, because I was born in 1977, which means I was born 10 years after Vatican II.
Yeah.
But I grew up in a church where they were still trying to figure out what Vatican II meant. So had I been born 10 or 15 years earlier, I would have grown up in a far more conservative Catholicism, at least. And if I had been born 10 to 15 years later, I would have gone through what I saw in my hometown later was sort of the backlash to Vatican II and a conservatism again. So I grew up in a really nice kind of liberal version of Catholicism. My Catholicism was shaped by Dominican nuns who ran my school, who were really focused on social justice. So that was, I grew up in the perfect version for me to be able to probably be affected appropriately religiously, and then to come to Bethel and not feel like coming to Bethel was about shedding something from the past, but it really was about adding. It was about saying, okay, well, I've had these experiences and they've taught me something. Now I'm going to come here and I'm going to learn from the profs I have here, the other students I have here. I learned a lot from students here that I didn't. I remember this is my freshman year. I was cleaning one of the locker rooms. I worked for facilities management. Okay. I was cleaning locker rooms with a guy, and he asked me if I was saved. And I didn't know what that question meant. And it's not because I wasn't religious, it's because that was not like a category that we talked about. Like we didn't think about, I never thought about salvation. Like that wasn't, and yeah, it was very, so I realized like, oh, I'm in a different world now, so I had to have him explain it to me. And then I had to think about, well, what do I say to this guy now? Because I was consciously not wanting to sort of just reject the faith of my past, but to say like, well, what can I learn from this as well? So I feel like my faith is shaped by these different communities. So pietism, I couldn't have named it when I was a student here, but that deeply impacted me, and it's deeply impacted me since I've come back. The faith of the nuns that I grew up around, and then the faith of the Brothers of the Sacred Heart that I lived with for that year, like all of those things are really shaped me a great deal.
When I think about the things you told me about your Bethel experience as a student, a touchstone experience that affected you that comes back to me is your time in Oregon. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I did two sort of study abroad experiences when I was a student. One of them was I went and studied at the Oregon Extension, which again I feel like I went to on accident. I had it was a Friday in my sophomore year, so I changed my major to history at that point.
From
computer science.
Okay.
And I had a Diana Magnuson class at 8 a.m. and this guy named Doug Frank came in and talked about the Oregon Extension, and I don't think I heard a word he said. I had another Diana Magnuson class at 9 a.m. He was there again, talked. I don't think I heard a word he said. Then at 2:50, I had Kevin Craig's Roman Civ, and he was there again. And all of a sudden, I thought, I want to go with this guy. And so
he seems familiar.
Well, yeah, and I was excited. I was excited, and I talked with Kevin a lot about it. I was excited about the idea of like, this is a group of people who actually, in the mid-'70s, said if you could do college however you wanted, if you could teach however you wanted, what would it look like? And a lot of us have that conversation. But this is a group of people who then went and did it. They bought this old logging camp in the mountains of Oregon and said, we're going to read the Brothers Karamazov, and we're going to read really hard stuff, and we're going to. By the time I was there, it was about sort of shutting off from technology, which is funny how sort of benign technology seemed in 1998 compared to now. Like we didn't have phones to give up, like most people didn't bring a computer, and there was one dial-up internet connection for the whole place, and we used it infrequently. So that wasn't as hard to sort of push away from technology. But yeah, I went up there and it was about. It's the nerdiest study abroad because I went up. Again, very monastic, and I read all day, and I, to the point where, this is where I'm also a creature of habit, so I sat in the same chair every day. I would go to the library, sit in the same chair, and I would sit there and read all day and then do whatever other stuff I needed to do. But I encountered really great books. I mean, the Brothers Karamazov easily could be another book that I could say, okay, that's pretty foundational to how I think about a lot of big questions in life. And I got to read it there with some really, really interesting people. I mean, John Linton, especially at the Oregon Extension, for some reason, he recognized in me right away that we shared something, and I'm still not sure what we share, but we shared something. And yeah, I mean, it's one of the really great relationships I've had with the teachers with John, and I don't even know why. It was more of the, let's just sit next to each other and be together, you know, and I don't think whenever either of us talked about what we were reading, I don't think it was that we somehow were moved by that. I think, I don't know, I don't know why he was drawn to me, and I was definitely drawn to him, and that was really, it was a really powerful experience, to the point where I think everybody who goes to that program, I think you carry the OE with you wherever you go. So I mean, this is very different teaching here than in Oregon, but I think there's something about how I think about how we relate to students that is shaped by that in some way. That just becomes part. I feel like life is often about kind of lashing together your experiences, and that's definitely a kind of core experience.
So you think about that relating to students.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned John Lennon. What are some other teachers who you've admired, maybe even who you've modeled yourself after? And why?
Okay. I could basically just go through the people who taught CWC when I was a TA here, but Neil Lettingo is really important. For one thing in particular that I still think about Neil is very few people here have ever seen Neil Lettingo teach, but some have. Like Neil, I'll look at you, Kevin, when I say this, right? When Neil taught, he brought so much energy into a classroom. Sarah Shady and I were joking about how sometimes when you teach in the morning, the students don't really have a lot of energy, and Neil brought all his own energy into the room. And even in a big room like 313, I realized from him, if you bring enough energy, you can take those sleepy students and bring them into what you're doing, and hopefully pull them along. So Neil was really important for that. Virginia Lettingo was really my mentor when I was here. So I basically replaced her when she left, and I spent probably 4 years thinking about my job as how do I make people not realize Virginia left. That's how I thought about it. It's like, if we can make sure everything that she did is still happening, we're going to be okay. And it wasn't until about 4 or 5 years when I realized, I can also just be me doing that. It's not just fun. But she was a great organizer, a great administrator. And what I also realized she did is she put me and other TAs, and then when I started working here, in positions that pushed us. So I think one of my first years here, I was just loaded to teach CWC, and somehow I ended up doing a couple ask meetings with students. I don't know, Virginia was basically getting me ready, saying, why don't you meet with this student and talk about it? So I ended up doing it, and then realizing I can do that. I could have the confidence enough to do that, so that was really important. Kevin obviously is a really important teacher in terms of thinking about how do you turn history into storytelling. So going to Roman Civ especially, and feeling like the whole semester was one big story, where he would bring up something in February, and then by mid-April, that thing he brought up in February kind of offhandedly came back, because now that was an issue for the Romans, this thing that they had, this precedent that they had set there. So when I think about CWC lectures...
And you said you didn't like plot.
That's right. That's right. When I think about CWC lecture, that really is where's the story? Let's find the story, and that really comes from Kevin. Kevin also had one of the most encouraging things that's ever been said to me, which was when I decided to change my major from a very practical thing like computer science to history. I was in CC 313, or no, CC 312. I was leading a workshop. This was my sophomore year. It was about me and about 80 students, and I realized as I was standing up in front of them talking about the Middle Ages that this is more fun than anything I've ever done. And it's like, I realized like, this is what I want to do. Like I like writing code, I like programming, but I don't have the joy that I have there. And I remember going to Kevin's office the next day, kind of nervous. Like I wanted to tell him, like, I think I'm going to do this thing, which may seem a little crazy. And he asked me to kind of describe what had happened the night before. And then he said, he kind of looked at me and he said, "Did you feel it?" Did I feel what? And he said, did you like feel that teacher thing? And I said, "I think so." And he just looked at me and said, "Good." And like that was the end of the conversation. It was like, that's like the great moment that's one of the great moments of my life, because I realized like, okay, then I'm probably on the right track. Like that's why I changed my major, because you sort of affirmed like, yeah, this like if you felt that, then that's a feeling you should chase. You should realize there's probably something to that. So, I mean, I think about that every time I teach and feel like it went well. I think like, yeah, I felt that very thing that I felt when I was a sophomore doing an exam review. Like it's really fun, and that's good. Because there's other parts of work that aren't fun, but that part's really fun.
That's where the tedium and boredom comes
That's
in.
right. That's right.
Yeah. I almost hesitate to ask this because I can't imagine you doing anything else. But which path do you think is more likely if you weren't doing what you're doing now?
Uh-huh.
All the hats you're wearing at Bethel. Which is more likely? Monasticism?
No.
Hold on. Computer science? Or something else?
Where does the road diverge? Does it diverge today, or does it diverge in 1996?
96.
96 is probably computer science, because I grew up with computers. Again, like I feel like my life is really accidental. Like for some reason, my mom was a teacher, my dad was a janitor. So it's not like I come from a super wealthy family, but in like 1983, my parents for Christmas got us an old, and that wasn't old, it was a brand new Texas Instruments computer that you plugged into your TV and you could play games on it. But my brother, who's 2 years older than me, showed me like, oh, you can like, if you don't put a cartridge in here, it just goes to this shell where you can write a program. And there was a book that came with it, so we, would read how to do that. And there's something about my brain that like worked like computer programming, and I realized like this is really fun. And I found we didn't have a computer for a long time, so I used to go to friends' houses just so I could use their computer. I would write code in a notebook, like 5-10 pages of code, go to a friend's house and type for an hour the code that I had. So I'd be running the programs in my head like, okay, I know this works, but now I want to actually put it into a computer to run it. So I loved it. But I didn't think I would love the job, because I realized the job probably isn't as creative as I think it is. At least that's what I thought, because I realized like, oh, when I'm in class, like we're learning about how do you program databases to like do administrative things for people, and I thought, well, that's fine, but like when do we get to make something? But I probably would have loved it. I think I really, and there's a part of me that it's not that I regret the path I took, but I regret that I actually broke with that a great deal. Like the thought of doing it now sounds really fun, but also like a big mountain to climb. Like I'd have to really learn a whole bunch.
Yeah, I see elements of how you've taken some of those ideas and brought them back into what you do now. You created a virtual museum for CWC, for students to explore in an online
That's just
format.
a really complicated PowerPoint, though. That's different.
True.
It's really complicated.
It is.
Yeah.
But that kind of idea of visualizing something abstract and then
Mhm.
creating it in a way that other people can experience.
Oh, sure.
Yes, PowerPoint, but
Yeah. I mean, there's a logic to it that I enjoy.
I don't know how it, we have a few more minutes, I think, but I want to ask a couple more questions. You're going to be on sabbatical this spring.
Yeah.
Can we get a trailer, a teaser, a promo for your sabbatical project?
Yeah, I actually started this weekend, which is I contacted. So I'm doing a, and this is it's exciting because I'm doing something that I think I can do, but I don't know that I can do, and that actually really excites me. I'm also going to look at Barrett and say, so prepare. There's like a 25% chance of an utter failure. Which, okay, he's okay with that. We're all on the record there. It's a big filmmaking project. What I really want to do is make a documentary. That's what I really want to do. But I also know that I might not be able to do that. So I need, if that part doesn't work, I need the rest to still be valuable.
Yeah.
I contacted everyone who is still here at Bethel, who has ever won the Faculty Excellence Award for teaching. So there's about 20 people. and I want to do film long-form interviews with them about teaching. And so I emailed them to say, can I have an hour or 90 minutes of your time? So like, I want a big chunk of time, and I want to just collect as much information from them. And then I'm going to build a digital archive where, so kind of for faculty development purposes, where people can access those. And if Kent Gerber was here, I would look at him and say, and I want to like meta tag it all so it's easy to find people talking about things, because it's not just dropping 90 minutes of video, but like actually having stuff people can search for. But then what I really want to do is take that and say, can I take those 20, 30 hours of footage and put together a 90-minute statement about teaching from the wisdom of these folks. So one of my favorite filmmakers is Errol Morris, and my favorite film of his is a movie that nobody talks about called Fast, Cheap, and Out of Control. It's great. So like, that's my template. I think I said in the workshop yesterday, I just like basically steal other people's templates and do my own stuff. Like I've watched that movie a number of times recently. I'm gonna probably watch it regularly on sabbatical because I want to pay attention to how he does a lot of things there. But that's a film where it's sort of about genius and creation and an oddity. And it's so he looks at these four people who are kind of brilliant in their own field. So one's a robotics expert, one is a topiary gardener, one's a lion tamer, and one is an expert on naked mole rats. And he intercuts them in this like, he's brilliant. So like, mine's not going to be that, but I like the idea of saying, let's talk to people who are really brilliant at what they do, and see if we can find. I love the idea of finding something in this kind of wealth of information. So that's the project. So,
Sounds amazing.
and so then hopefully May 23rd at 7 p.m. you can watch it. So that's my goal.
So there's a screening.
That's my hope. Yeah.
That's amazing. How do you feel about the Thin Blue Line?
A lot of plot in that, Chris. See,
I almost had him.
see, I picked the most plotless Errol Morris stuff.
I have two questions.
Yes.
Then we'll wrap. If you, this is the how long, we have lots of hypothetical conversations at lunch. This is not $1 million but type question, but I want to give you one day out of time. It's a day disconnected from the days that come before it, the days that come after it.
Sure.
It's a singular day, a singular 24-hour period for which you can do anything you want. Spend your time any way you wish. What do you want to do with that day?
I don't know. Because honestly, like the first thing that comes to mind is a really terrible use of that day. So I don't want to say that.
No one will know how you spend this day.
No, but the terrible use is like I'd love to get caught up in stuff I need to get done, which is like a really terrible.
That actually, in fact, is
that's
a terrible
use of the day. Yeah, I think. Well, in truth, what I would really love is nothing. Like and this is part of my, having a family, having kids, and marrying into a big family, and my family lives close. So even in the summer, there's like things happening all the time, and I really love the moments where there's nothing. Where like, and this happens occasionally because if I'm working on a big project in the summer, sometimes my wife and kids will go up to her parents' cabin for a week, and I'll work. But I will sometimes take half days where I actively don't do something, and I'll sometimes go for a walk and just sort of wander. And it's I actually, because I don't do that enough. So that's kind of what I would like to do. And again, it's not an exciting answer, but it would be really nice. That would be nice.
I love it.
Because if nobody else is doing anything, then I can't get behind.
That's right.
So,
That's right. Yeah. Well, that's something I should have asked you.
I don't know. I don't think that I had like a hoping you would ask a question. So that was the boat's question. So something you should have asked me. I don't know. I don't have a good answer for that.
That's all right.
So you should ask me to read this to close it though.
I would like you to do
All right.
that.
So again, you have to picture being 22 years old in part of the country you've never been to, teaching kids who you don't understand you, who don't want to be in your classroom, but knowing that you need to get up each day and go back into that classroom. So this is how I made it through, and hopefully this gets at least one person to want to read the rest of this story. So the author the narrator is telling a story about his brother named Seymour here. So this is the very end of the story. He says, "I'm finished with this, or rather, it's finished with me. Fundamentally, my mind has always balked at any kind of ending. How many stories have I torn up since I was a boy simply because they had what that old Chekhov baiting noise Somerset Maugham calls a beginning, a middle, and an end? 35, 50? One of the 1,000 reasons I quit going to the theater when I was about 20 was that I resented like hell filing out of the theater just because some playwright was forever slamming down his silly curtain. Whatever happened to that stalwart Boer Fortinbras, who eventually fixed his wagon? Nonetheless, I'm done here. There are one or two more fragmentary physical type remarks I'd like to make, but I feel too strongly that my time is up. Also, it's 20 to 7 and I have a 9 o'clock class. There's just enough time for a half-hour nap, a shave, and maybe a cool, refreshing bloodbath. I have an impulse, more of an old urban reflex than an impulse, thank God, to say something mildly caustic about the 24 young ladies just back from big weekends at Cambridge or Hanover or New Haven who will be waiting for me in room 307. But I can't finish writing a description of Seymour, even a bad description, even one where my ego, my perpetual lust to share top billing with him is all over the place, without being conscious of the good, the real. This is too grand to be said, so I'm just the man to say it. But I can't be my brother's brother for nothing, and I know, not always, but I know, that there's no single thing I do that's more important than going into that awful room 307. There isn't one girl in there, including the terrible Miss Zabel, who is not as much my sister as Boo Boo or Franny. They may shine with the misinformation of the ages, but they shine. This thought manages to stun me. There's no place I'd really rather go right now than room 307. Seymour once said that all we do our whole lives is go from one little piece of holy ground to the next. Is he never wrong? Just go to bed now, quickly, and slowly.
Sam Mulberry, thank you for your autobiography.
Anytime.